All right, I am going to show you how to mount the new LED snowboard lights that wrap all the way around the board. That's these guys right here. This is a new design. Basically, every single light has its own little circuit board, and there are wires that actually run between each of those circuit boards. So these lights can actually flex sideways, which is really cool because it allows us to go around the nose and the tail. So not only can they flex like this, but they can also flex basically any way you want. And they have a backup communication channel. So if one light breaks, it can actually continue to function without the one light. If two break, then the lights downstream from it will not work, but you'll have to break two of them in a row. And the likelihood of doing that is a lot less than just breaking one. So having that backup communication channel will really make them much more resilient. So on this snowboard, I had a system previously mounted. So I've got this controller mount already done. So that part is already done for me. I'm gonna talk about, placing this kind of after you've got things figured out. Generally what you'll want to do is put it next to whatever your forward foot is. Generally you'll kind of put it next to that, because most of the time people are going to want to take their back foot out when they get off the lift, and you don't really want to try skating with the controller where you want to put your foot. So, when I take my foot out, I want to put it here, so that's why I've got the controller up here just behind my front foot. So the first thing I'm going to do to mount these strips is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove my bindings. Before I do that though, I'm going to take some tape and mark where my bindings are by putting a piece of tape kind of on each side. And this is going to help me here in a minute with doing the lights. So having some of this painter's tape is really going to help you out with getting things aligned. I'll put a smaller piece over here because I've got some binding spacers already mounted, and that fits right between them. And so here, this one should be fairly obvious because the controller's already kind of butted up against it, but I'll go ahead and put a piece anyways. All right, now that we've got that done, we go ahead and remove the bindings. So I've actually already got binding spacers mounted. If this is your first time mounting lights, then you won't have these spacers yet, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So the first thing I want to focus on is getting these lights mounted. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just put one strip aside, and then I'm going to focus on one. Now what I want to do is I want to plan on having, let me go ahead and connect this up to the box. I want to plan on having these lights kind of start and stop in the middle of the board. And there's a couple ways we can do that. We can either kind of mark the center of the board. You could measure it, or if you can kind of eyeball it, I can kind of look at this and say, well, the center is pretty much going to be here. This has actually got like a serrated edge. I can kind of see the little bump right there where it's in the center. Or, I can try to do that and then see where it kind of comes to on this side. Kind of have to take this a little bit at a time. depending on the length of your board, you know, this is going to come to pretty close right there. So that's actually sized pretty well for this board. This is a 157. If your board is longer, then basically this is either going to have to come short a little bit. And honestly, don't worry, because no one's even going to notice. Once it's dark, they're going to see the outline of the lights. They're not going to know that your board goes like a little bit further. Or you can kind of space it, but then when your lights are on, you'll have just a slight gap here. Of course, if you tell me what size board you've got, I can try to adjust accordingly. I can't go necessarily longer than this. This is how they come, and this will fit pretty well like a 157. Of course, if your board is smaller, you can let me know, and I can go ahead and I can cut it, or you can kind of do a little bit of an overlap. So there's some different options there. Now there's another way you can align this too. I use these pieces of tape here. The other way that you can do it is you can take this and fold it in half and kind of get to there's one LED that's going to be at the top, like center. So you can actually take and mark this. Little piece of tape there. Kind of ripped funny, but that worked to my advantage. So now what I could do is I could kind of start it here and then work my way backwards with it. That's another option. The best thing to do is kind of check it out before you go sticking it down. That way, like, if you have too much or too little, then you can figure out how do you want to deal with that. So really, this is a good time to spend just a little bit of time figuring out, how it's all going to come together before you peel and stick. So looks like mine's going to check out pretty well. I think what I'm going to do, since it looks like it's going to line up pretty perfectly, I'm just going to go ahead and start it from one side and kind of start in the middle right here and then work my way around. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of peel that back a little bit. And actually, before I go any further, I need to make sure that this has got a nice clean surface. So I'm going to take some little alcohol prep pads. Just kind of wipe this so that I don't have anything oily or sticky that's going to interfere with that getting a good bond. You also want to do this at room temperature, like, in Fahrenheit that's 72 degrees, because the adhesive won't bond well if it's real cold. It takes 24 hours to be up to 90% strength on the bond. And then after 72 hours, it's 100%, but that's at room temperature. So if you're below room temperature, it's going to take even longer. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and just peel a little bit off. And I'm going to get fairly close to the edge. I don't need to necessarily get right on it. Being a little bit further back does have its advantages. I'm not talking about real far. I'm talking about maybe like an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch. Right in through here, I pretty much had to kind of come up on it. So not too bad. Like I'm maybe a quarter of an inch over. So I'm gonna kind of put a little bit of pressure, especially up here where it's having to curve. We want to make sure this is really pushed down nice and tight so that it doesn't like try to like buckle up. I'll take my tape off too before I forget about it. And I'll come back and I'll do even more. Pressure is really the key to a good bond. So like after I get done, I'm gonna actually kind of walk on this and put some serious pressure on it, but I'll go ahead and put the other strip on first. So at this point, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and put your controller box. If you don't have the mount already done, you can go ahead and mount that by taking a look at, you know, where your bindings are and placing it just behind your front foot and get that mounted, because this will help you to make sure, you know, you got your cables kind of situated the right way. Try to make sure they're not, you know, going to be in your way. Make sure they're long enough. You don't want to get everything situated and then realize like you can't quite plug it in. So it's a really good idea to kind of hook this up as you're doing it so that you don't run into any problems. Also, it helps kind of keep things straight, because see, like this cable to this side is plugged in here. I wouldn't want to try to like put this cable also on that side, because it needs to go to this side of the box. So if I go ahead and plug this in, that'll kind of keep me straight. Don't necessarily need to screw that in, but I'll do it. And one thing I could do is I could kind of walk this around just to see how things are going to pan out. This way I can see like if I'm going to run into any excess. I think I'm going to be all right, but I'm going to be possibly really close. Oh yeah. So I do have a little bit of an overlap problem here that I need to try to work out. I think what I'm going to have to do is let's do this. Since I have a little bit of an overlap problem, let's fold this in half and mark my center LED here. Then I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go ahead and I may need to either trim. I have about an inch of material on the end that doesn't have a cable coming out of it. I could trim some of that off. The other thing that I could do is I could just plan to kind of overlap a little bit. But if I want these lights to line up nice, then trimming a little bit off here will help, and then potentially trimming off a little bit here will help me just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to And actually I'm going to start here because this particular strip has some adhesive that goes from here to here, and it looks like the factory had to start a new segment here, so I'm going to just peel it from here. I just basically want to expose this part, which is the center, and then I'm going to try to line it up with the center of the tip of my board here. It looks pretty good. Might as well go ahead and finish this too. Cool, so I'll be able to make that work. I thought I was going to be able to deal with this without even having to cut anything off the end, but I think the factory ended up putting a little more on the end than they previously had. So that's just throwing me off just a little bit. But the cool thing is that I'm going to be able to clip that and be okay, because this thing is actually full of a silicone sealant. So cutting a little bit off of there, as long as you don't get too close to this, if you got probably a good 1/4 of an inch, you're going to be fine. You obviously can't cut any off the piece with the cable coming out of it, but we can easily do a little bit off of here. What I need to do is kind of pull this piece up just a little bit before it tries to bond too strongly, and then we'll clip that. So I'm going to go get some cutters. So I have some diagonal cutters. If you've got access to these, they're great. You can use scissors, but diagonal cutters, if you can get your hands on them, work really good for this. So it looks like as these strips come from the factory, they will fit a 157 board. But the best thing to do is let me know when you order. I can make sure that we've got the right size for you. Well, let's try to turn it on. Cool. All right, so now that we've got the lights on, mention a few things. If you don't have the binding spacers on like I already do, then this is the time when you want to go ahead and set those up. Best thing to do is take a look at the instructions, because they have some different configurations depending on whether you have channel bindings or whether you've got just the standard binding holes like I've got. But basically there's a couple different configurations. The main idea is you just want to try to put as many as you can fit to support the pressure of your bindings. We looked into doing some like 3D printed binding plates, things like that, and we might eventually do it. It's a bit hard because there's so many different designs, but the main idea here is just to try to fill as much of this area below your bindings with spacers as you can. So we give you quite a few of them. There's a total of 4 large and 10 small spacers. And so right now I have a big one under the heel, a big one under the heel, another big one under each toe, and then basically small ones along the sides, and then one right in the middle. And you want to kind of go ahead and get these things placed, and you can do this one of 2 ways. You can use the tape like I've got here, and then go ahead and place these things knowing exactly kind of where your edges of your bindings were based on where the tape is. And it's funny, I marked this, but it looks like what happened was I think my binding actually was 1 hole over, because I marked it here and here. So I'm just realizing that I'm not sure why. I took it off and maybe put it back in the wrong hole, or maybe last time I went snowboarding I decided to kick it over 1. Anyway, the tape is really good though for getting this set up. The other way that you can do it is these things have like a double-sided stick tape on the bottom of them. Really the only purpose of that is just to keep it from sliding once you put the bindings on, because really the pressure is what holds them down. But the tape just keeps it from sliding out. You can flip them upwards and basically put them on the bottom of the binding and stick it down. The only problem is the bottom of most bindings is not flat, so there's not really a lot of great surface area to stick to. Anyhow, but one way or another, you need to get a nice configuration of binding spacers, because these are what are going to save your strips. You don't want your pressure of your binding to push on the strip here or here or here or here. These things are taking the crazy amounts of pressure when if you really bend the board hard, it can put a serious amount of force like right in here, or if you really lean hard onto like your toes or heels, it can really push hard onto these LEDs that are running right under it. So these are critical. You got to make sure these are in place if you want to protect your lights. Also, when you go to put your bindings back on, which I could go ahead and do that now, you want to make sure that you use the right screws. We provide some. Sometimes they don't work out, but generally the length will work out. We have a countersunk screw, 20 millimeter, and we also have a washer in case you need to take up just a little bit of that length. But generally this length will work. If it doesn't, you can let me know, and we'll try to get that figured out. But you can use the tape at this point to kind of get things lined back up, and then screw everything back in. If you still have some slack to deal with, you can use some of the provided cable clips to arrange the cable so that it's not in your way. What I can do is kind of clip these things on. And I wouldn't recommend clipping it on the box side of the disconnect because you probably want to be able to take that on and off to charge. It's up to you. You could, but I'm more of the mindset to try to just put them over here on this side. Main thing here is just trying to keep it from, you know, being loose. You don't want to catch your boot on the cabling. And the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put this down onto the floor, and I'm just going to walk on all of this for maybe a minute or two just to make sure that everything got good pressure. And then after that, I'm going to give it a few days to bond at room temperature, and it'll be ready for the slopes.